Okay. Uh, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the special guest lecture for today. The Chinese philosopher Wang Dongyue provides a way of understanding existence by applying Laozi's Taoist philosophy to the evolution of the universe. Wang regards the evolutionary process as a lessening in the potency of being, in an intrinsic measure of stability. As potency decreases, a system becomes more unstable and its lost essence is supplemented by growth in complexity and new attributes. From this viewpoint, expansion of complexity and knowledge represent a loss, which now leads humanity into its present crisis. Wong's perspective suggests an Asian approach for constructing a more harmonious and multi-civilizational vision. Bringing us this Asian perspective of Wang Dongyue's philosophy is the special lecture for today. It will be delivered by Professor Hirofumi Katayama. Hirofumi Katayama is a professor at JF Berlin University, Tokyo, where he specializes in environmental economics. He organized and teaches the first big history course in Japan. In 2009, he and Nobuo Sujimura organized the first Japanese big history symposium, Big History and the Liberal Arts, hosted by JFO Berlin University. Hero's goal is to construct a Buddhist big history, which is based on this respect for all life and existence. His publications include Politics of Climate Change over the Arctic, Preliminary Thoughts on the Global Commons, published in 2014, and Free Market and the Commons, An Introduction to Environmental Finance, work published in 2004. So let us watch Professor Hirofumi Katayama's recording.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. I'm Hirofumi Katayama, professor at JFO Berlin University, Tokyo, Japan. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak here today. And thank you very much, Professor Barry Roderick, for preparing the conference and invited me here. Today, I would like to talk about the Chinese philosopher Wang Dongyue and his unique big history approach. This photo shows my seminar students blowing a field. Under the COVID-19 problem, farm activities become popular in Japan. In a university, I have a seminar of community and agriculture, and we work at the field every weekend. We engage in eco-farming, so our labor productivity seems to be low a little, but we enjoy. Before making my presentation, let me introduce myself briefly. I'm a professor of College of Arts and Sciences, JFO Berlin University. This is a liberal arts college, and I teach economics in its social science division. My specialty is environmental economics, but about 10 years ago, I found big history and I was fascinated by its broad vision, especially big history's cosmic perspective. Since then, I have engaged in educational activity on big history in Japan. In 2016, I started a big history course for the first time in Japan, together with Ryosuke Miyawaki. His specialty is radio astronomy, and with the assistance of Nobuo Tsujimura. In 2019, we held a symposium, Big History and Liberal Arts, in a university. This is a photo of that time. It's me, Barry, David Christian, Sun Yue, Nobuo, Afshan Majid, and other Asian big historians. And this year, 2021, our university started Big History program. The catchphrase is, Big History is the ultimate form of liberal arts. This catchphrase expresses big history's super interdisciplinary nature. Now, let's get into today's issue. At first, I explain why we should give attention to Wang Dongyue's philosophy. To tell the truth, I have long been dissatisfied with Western mainstream big history because of its anthropocentric and modernistic characteristics. Western big history's main keywords are complexity and collective learning. For Western big history, the history of the universe primarily means a history of increasing complexity where human beings of the modern era are placed at the highest state of complexity or evolution, thanks to their ability of collective learning. Of course, I admit the accomplishment of modernism and the greatness of humanity. However, when I try to apply big history to today's global problems in the Anthropocene, which complexity and collective learning themselves brings about, I found it very difficult for Western big history to critically understand the problem of Anthropocene. We should re-examine these concepts. In his latest book, Christian emphasized the negative side of complexity as tax, complexity tax, or entropy tax. This is one of the most important keywords in his book. However, complexity is still the core of the story, and characteristics of Western big history are maintained. I don't suggest that entropy tax is an epicycle of geocentric theory, but I think at least it is necessary to supplement Western big history with other big history paradigms. This is the reason why I'm going to talk about Wang Dongyue at my presentation. He is an independent scholar. Specialty is philosophy. I have not yet met him or nor had a contact with him. And it is Tansan in Malaysia who introduced me Wang's theory. His main work is A Unified Theory of Evolution, in Chinese, Wu Yang Tonglun. Sorry, my pronunciation is bad because I cannot speak Chinese. The original version is in Chinese, but there is very good translation in English, translated by Bridgman, so I highly recommend reading it. At my presentation, I'm going to introduce his theory based on the book. The source of one's idea is Laozi, ancient famous Chinese thinker. Laozi defined origin of all beings as Tao. Here are two phrases from his work Tao De Jing, section 40. First, reverting is the movement of Tao. Wang pointed out that Laozi believed that human civilization is moving astray from the way of nature or losing Tao. So Laozi advocated return to simplicity, return to one's origin, and discard wisdom, reject knowledge. Wang called it as doctrine of doing things unintentionally. The second phrase is weakening is the effectuation of Tao. This roughly means that the phenomenon of weakening is the unfolding of Tao and the form of its realization. Wang called it as doctrine of weakness. Wang boldly applied Laozi's Taoist philosophy, especially his doctrine of weakness, to big history and made a unique interpretation from this standpoint. His book consists of three parts: philosophy of nature, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of society. The starting point of his theory is the concept potency of being. It is every being's strength or stability to exist. The amount of this ability is expressed by degree of being. When some being's degree of being is low, this being is fragile and easy to dissolve or destroyed. When degree of being is high, it is stable and able to keep itself for a long time in the universe. Wang proposed this concept as a hypothesis and questioned how is the distribution of the degree of being in the natural system of beings? There are five possibilities. A. Chaotic distribution. There is no tendency. B. Equal distribution. Relative stability of each being is equal. C. Wave distribution. Each being's stability presents periodic wave movement. D. Rising distribution presents the tendency to increase. And E. Falling distribution presents the tendency to decrease. Perhaps Western big history considers the evolution of the universe is in the rising distribution. For example, Darwin's evolution theory and his "the fittest survive" seems to imply the tendency of a species' degree of being to strengthen. Surprisingly, one leads to entirely opposite conclusion from the scientific knowledges of big history. Beings in the universe have evolved from physical beings of particles and atoms to chemical beings of molecules, then biological beings, and next human beings emerged. Wang pointed out this process of transformation shows the tendency of weakening potency of being or declining degree of being. Wang summarized the tendency as below: gradual decrease in relative quantity. The straighten up, the spatial mass distribution decreases. Gradual shortening of relative existing time. The straighten up, the time span distribution shortens. Gradual complexification of the sustaining condition and gradual increasing rate of variation. The straighten up, the complexity and differentiation increase. Gradual disappearance of being in itself and gradual invigorating of being for itself. These two words are somewhat difficult. Being in itself means that a being has unconditioned, independently existing power. On the contrary, being for itself means that a being's existing power is so weakened that it can no longer exist without supplementing its essence of being with some attributes or structure. One explained this tendency, the laws of weakening potency of being, by an example. Single-celled organisms, such as cyanobacteria, have the highest degree of being of all biological beings. Their volume is small, and the relative surface area in contact with the environment is large, so they can efficiently absorb nutritional substances. Their growth potential and adaptivity is high. They occupy broad area of space. As examined, the more evolved the being is, the lower the degree of being and the more complex the attribute of being it has. Why do beings tend to weaken? And how can weakened beings continue sustaining? One argued that from the very beginning, being has been unable to sustain itself sufficiently, so it has a spontaneous tendency to compensate the inadequacy of one's own essence. This is the inner driving force of evolution or development. From this standpoint, every compensation is a loss of a previous degree of being, and in addition, this compensation and loss creates a positive feedback loop. Compensation caused by weakening, and weakening process caused by compensation. In consequence, as the diagram shows, the movement from sustaining being to losing being is the irreversible path of the material evolution. One calls this tendency the law of gradual weakening compensation. Next, I would like to talk about the process of weakening compensation in more detail. According to Wang, there are two ways of compensation: acquiring new attributes or constructing a structure together with other beings. Attribute is defined as beings' subsidiary or additional qualities, and the structure is defined as beings' interdependent form. All beings compensate their weak essence by addition of attribute and construction of structure, which on the one hand raises their complexity and on the other hand weakens their potency of being and leads to instability. In this parallel compensation process, beings' attribute evolved ultimately into mind, and beings' structure evolved ultimately into society. According to the theory of weakening compensation, the potency of any concrete being inevitably tends to decay, thereby demanding a corresponding amount of attributive compensation to maintain the continuation of being. Because this process goes on irreversibly in the long run, ultimately it results in the modes of attributive compensation developing to an extremely complex level, which is the origin of mental being. Affective attributes is being's ability to sense and respond to outer circumstance. At first, even the most primitive matter, such as electrons, have its affective attributes, affectivity. An electron recognizes and identifies a proton and gets into the orbit of the proton and makes an atom, which is the starting point of the mind. Next, this physical chemical matter's attribute of sense response evolves into the biological attribute of perception, sensibility. Biotic beings acquire sense organ system and neural network, which is the origin and foundation of human perceptual physiology. Third, understanding is the response of judgment emerging in the animals of vertebrate stage. This is the source and foundation upon which humans establish their categorized identifying response. And finally, reason is the affective attributes in the stage of human civilization, which uses symbolic languages. Reason is the extreme product of the virtual compensation of affective attribute. Reason's ideal logic transcends the intuition of sensibility and the judgment of understanding. It has a moving constitution of false being, and its unsteady solo progression presents a vector of critical being. Reason is the affective attribute of the weakest and most interdependent being. Let's look at the other way of compensation, structure and society. Each weakened being not only adds itself a new attribute, but also makes coupling linkage of mutual supplementation with each other, and doing so, they attain the restructuring vitality of social compensation. Of course, this process also allows the laws of weakening compensation. The degree of being or stability declines, while structuration and the interdependence inside each group continually rises higher. Society is the evolved form of structure, so we could say molecule is a socializing compensation of atoms. However, society's original meaning is related to life. Organic beings' physical attributive compensation makes it weaker, and this requires organisms' social structural compensation. Wang pointed out three stages of society. Elementary society is the society of single-celled organisms. The degree of single cells is rather high, so they live in the most stable natural society. Intermediate society is the social stage of all multicellular organisms from Cambrian age to the human stone age. Advanced society refers to civilized human society, since intelligent reform transcends the space-time restrictions of physical variation. Its degree of differentiation is extremely high, and the degree of survival of its social constituents drastically reduced, thus making it rapidly approach toward the highest degree of biological social structure and the most unstable critical point of losing being. The evolutionary course of society is described in the diagram. If the socially structured state increases its complexity and shifts from left to right, the individual and overall survival power of the species tend to weaken in biological evolution. These are the outline of one's weakened compensation. At the end of the book, Wang stated the conclusion as below. Human nature is the expression of all natural beings, and human being is the miniature of the universe. Or rather, human being is the latest weakened sustaining constitution of the universe's evolution, which is the modern annotation of the idea on the integral oneness of nature and humans found in ancient Chinese philosophical thought. What does it mean? Isn't this another form of anthropocentrism? I don't think so. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates said, know thyself. Following the phrase, what one wants to say is, know thy weakness, or more precisely, know thou art weak. That is, when you realize and admit you are the weakest being in the universe, you can see you are connected with, interdependent with, and supported by everything in the universe. This is the most important message I received from one theory. So far, I have talked about one theory. Now, let's turn to the final part of my presentation. What implications does his theory have for big historians of IBHA? The first implication is the possibility of non-anthropocentric and relation-oriented big history. One's weakening compensation shows that modernization, which humans have attained, express not only their strength, but also their weakness. Wang said it simply and clearly, complex forms directly expresses the weak essence. One's theory has an affinity with relation-oriented theories of big historians such as Sun Yu's Tao Big History, Roel Gustafson's Big Politics, and Barry Rodriguez's Mutualization. Barry said, big history is a process of mutualization, since it results in heightened awareness of the fragile mutual dependence between human and non-human worlds, between organic and inorganic regimes, as well as between microscopic and macroscopic levels on earth and beyond. What he said here seems to be completely the same with one's weakening compensation. The second implication is the possibility of postmodern comparatively big history. One's weakening compensation gave us consistent explanation of the unifying connection between nature, life, and society based on the contemporary scientific knowledges. By doing so, he showed it is possible to interpret big history in different ways from Western big history. In fact, I believe that big history as science is one, but perspective of big history is not one. What does the perspective mean? Japanese famous Buddhist priest Nichiren, who lived 800 years ago, said in his writings, hungry spirits perceive the Ganges River as fire, human beings perceive it as water, and heavenly beings perceive it as Amrita. Amrita is a drink which gives us immortality. In the phrase, Nichiren argued that though the water is the same, it appears differently according to one's mental state. Similarly, we can see the Ganges River of big history differently according to our practical position. My own position of the Ganges River is Buddhist big history. One's concept of potency of being has a sense of respect of nature, respect for all life, and respect for all non-living beings. Buddhism has expressed the idea by the concept of Buddhahood. Japanese Tendai word Somuku Kokudo Shikkai Jobutsu, which means that grasses, trees, and lands, all beings have Buddhahood, is the idea which Japanese Buddhism finally developed. As, a, as an example, let me introduce a poem which shows the viewpoint of Buddhist big history. This poem, Big Catch, is the work of Japanese poet Misuzu Kaneko. It is well known in Japan because you can see it in Japanese textbook elementary schools. At sunrise, glorious sunrise, it's a big catch of sardines. On the beach, it's like a festival, but in the sea, they will hold funerals for the tens of thousands dead. I have a big history course in Oberlin University, and I make it a rule to read this poem after I finish the lectures of Eight Thresholds and Anthropocene. Then, students easily recognize that the theme of the poem is the same what the big history tells us, the respect for all existence and the criticism against anthropocentrism. The third and last implication is related to the following question. We can say Wang's theory is an Asian approach for big history, but for whom? We Asians criticize anthropocentrism and modernism of the West. However, how about our situation? As you know, Asia is politically divided. On the other hand, Asia is economically and culturally connected. Parag Khanna, Indian specialist in international relations, positively accepts the situation in his book The Future is Asian, Commerce, Conflict, and Culture in the 21st Century. His central keyword is connectivity. Connectivity in the form of transformation, energy, and in communication infrastructure has brought about a global network revolution in which human civilization becomes reorganized according to cities and supply chains, more than nations and borders. Nowadays, Asia shows strong expansion of connectivity, such as the Belt and Road Initiative by China. So he argued that Asianization of Asia is proceeding. I must admit, as he said, Asia's connectivity is really expanding. However, it is based on concrete covered and energy intensive infrastructure. Asianization of Asia is going on in a modern and unsustainable way. Therefore, I cannot share his optimistic view. Asia is captured by the modern concept of nation state and economic growth. In the era of colonialism, Asianism took the form of resistance. And today, in the era of the Anthropocene, Asianism should take the form of value. However, this value is not only for the West, but for us Asians, in order to emancipate ourselves from the iron chain of modernism. This is a group photo of the G7 summit and Cornwall this year. Here is our Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. When I saw this thing at the TV, I had a very uncomfortable feeling. We need and we really want Asians' own community. Big history can be a powerful foundation for us Asians to construct our common and at the same time universal values. So my conclusion is Asians should construct ecological and harmonious Asian big history for Asians. Thank you for your attention.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Professor Katayama, for introducing us to the philosophy of Wang Dongyue. And I especially was quite inspired by the last slide, which you in which you wrote about Asianism as a value rather than moving away from Asianism as a resistance. That is the positive outlook that we need. Thank you so much for that. We have questions and for you. So we will begin from the chat section because that is where the question started coming first, and then I will go to the Q&A session. So the first question is by Chiara Codetta, and she says that it reminds me of Kalaman's yesterday's presentation as consciousness primary to matter. Does it resonate with you?
I didn't hear the Kalman's presentation, so I cannot understand what he or she said yesterday. And but one think that there is a continuation between atoms. I mean, electromagnetic force and human beings' consciousness. And in my opinion, Western big history emphasizes the discontinuity of beings. This is expressed in the word such as threshold or emergence. The below of the threshold and above of the threshold, there are completely different world, but one stressed continuity rather than discontinuity. So, in my opinion, he want to express all being is equally variable. This is my opinion.
Thank you so much. The next question we have is from Vrishali Purandare. Uh, she says that do you find similarities between Buddhist doctrines such as okay. I'm so sorry. I'm not very familiar with Sanskrit, so I have to. Could we have this projected with the? Uh, Vrishali, would you like to come and ask your question directly and explain it, to Professor Katayama what you're asking about?
Uh, Sorry, I cannot understand Sanskrit because I'm an economist and not philosopher. So this word, what does it word means? But is there a similarity between Buddhist thought and Taoist philosophy? I think there are a lot of similarity. And in relation to one's weakening compensation, the most important is the I cannot say in the concept of nothing or negation. In philosophically speaking, and in Western thought, the the subject I is the starting point of everything. But in Eastern thought, they uh, mm, and negate the subject I. That is the concept of Taoist Tao, or in Buddhist, Ku, empty, or Mu, nothing. Uh, in such a sense, and this is related to the one's awakening compensation. That is, human being is weak being. Yeah.
Thank you. There is one mistake which I made because this is Buddhist philosophy, so it won't be Sanskrit; it would be Pali or Prakrit. But I am as
Prakrit, sorry.
unfamiliar with the terms. So just a correction there about the language, because connecting Buddhism with Sanskrit would be very wrong. So the next question we have is by Barry Rodriguez. Uh, and he says, weakening compensation seems similar to singularity and similar to complexity, but providing an advisory for its limitations, an important warning. What do you think? Can we move towards complexity but with caution?
Yes, I think one's weakening compensation theory have uh, uh, much similarity with the concept of singularity of Ray Kurzweil. But Ray Kurzweil thinks singularity is a good thing, and human being should aim at this position. But one uh, many times have a warning of this singularity. In Chinese word, uh, I cannot read Chinese, but the kanji character is the same, so I can understand the kanji. So I feel what Chinese means. So, but in English, one says what, uh, for example, virtual being, or lose in my presentation, losing being, or critical being. One says various expression, and the, he gave us a warning of we go to the singularity, and we our weakness go to ultimate form, and I agree with you.
Thank you. The next question is a request by CK, and he says that can you read Misuzu Kaneko's poem in Japanese for us to appreciate its beauty?
Okay. I read her book, Big Catch. In Japanese, 大量。朝焼け小焼けだ大量だ。大葉イワシの大量だ。浜は祭りのようだけど、海の中では何万のイワシの弔いするだろうって。This is the big catch.
Thank you so much. So the next question is from CK. Now it's a question. He asks that you are in the international politics, we have two superpowers. As you know, in the international politics, we have two superpowers are now competing to extend uh, uh, which almost unbearable. I'm sorry, I'm not able to make out sense of this. Would Asianization of big history divide humanity than unite them to forge a new civilization to replace the degrading industrial?
This is a very difficult problem. And at the first day of the conference, David Christian questioned at Nobu's comment that ですね、何したかというと、David Christian asks Nobu, do you think there is a danger that big history split into different regional forms, an Asian form, an European form, and so on? And I think this is a very important problem. So, in relation to these two superpowers, and this is my impression. This is related to my impression at G7 summit, the photo, and I feel that the G7 summit at Cornwall were held for make a group against China, and but I think there is some problem with President China, but I don't think with America or with the West and the protest China is a good thing. And my feeling is I criticize my family, such as parents or brothers or sisters, and I think in such a thing, and we Japanese and Chinese, and yes, of course, with Korean people have intensive discussion, and for this big history is a good foundation, and we should be big history or make a good foundation for us Asian people. This is my one of the main message of my presentation.
Thank you. David Baker has raised his hand, so we will take the questions after David Baker's question. So can we have David Baker on this stage, please?
Can you hear me?
Hello, David.
I don't think you can see me, but okay.
We can hear you
Ah, there we are.
and
Oh
see you
no,
as well.
now you can see me too. Right.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, so yeah, it's an honor to meet you too. So I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead,
Uh,
David.
thank you. Uh, if all human conflicts could be settled by war, what would be your percentage of the population that you would think acceptable?
Sorry, my uh, hearing ability is not so good, so I cannot understand your questions. Please repeat.
Uh, if all human conflicts could be settled by war, what percentage of the population would you consider acceptable?
If all human conflicts could be settled by war, then what percentage of human population? I'm sorry, David. After that, what percentage of human population
Would you consider acceptable?
would you consider acceptable?
Uh, 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 I uh, I don't know well, but mm, and and at least one thing can be said. If it is not, I don't catch your point, and we are now facing many serious problems and environmental problem and the problem of war and conflict. And one want to say that the reason why we fell into the crisis uh, is because that we didn't look at the weakness of human being. When we think about various things, the weakness is very important. The, the, uh, by bearing in mind weakness, we can find, perhaps we can find a new way or new balance of the world. I don't sorry.
Yeah.
Perhaps I cannot catch your point.
Thank you, Professor Katayama. Perhaps we can continue a more informal conversation at the table where more ideas could be, brought up. So, because we are short
Yeah.
of time, there is a next session. Thank you so much, David. Now, perhaps we can
Oh,
take
no
this
worries. I
conversation.
yeah.
Sorry.
I
Okay,
have further
so
questions for the speaker.
we can continue this at the table, David. we are almost at the end of our session. Thank you so much. Thank you. So unfortunately, we are running out of time. So there is just one. I think we may have time for one question, and then because there is a lot of discussion that's coming up, perhaps you can join Professor Katayama at a table and we can have discussions later. So the last question that I'll take is from Vandana Singh. She says that does this approach to Asian big history open up space for a relational economics instead of the current neoliberal economics? What would that look like?
This is a good point. I think this is also なんていうかな、foundation of relational, you say relational economics instead of neoliberal economics. And for example, under the COVID-19 problems, even U.S. government tend to have a policy of a big government. And at one side, there are many people who suffer from COVID-19. And for this sake, the economic differentiation is bigger and bigger. So, and I think in Japan, I think many places of the world now such as relational policies such as basic income are examined. So this shows the limit of capitalism at the same time. So I think now human beings are, in my opinion, human beings are in the transition from capitalism to other economic systems. And in such a situation, one's awakening compensation is a useful philosophy of our economic policies.
Thank you, Professor Katayama. So I'm extremely sorry that there are many other questions and I'm not able to take it because we have a next session to go to, and that session is also, we'll be discussing Wang Dongyue's philosophy. So we can have table conversations, later. Please, join the speakers, at the tables. Thank you so much, Professor Katayama, for joining us today. And